thank you all for being here today, and welcome to Blue Rain Gallery. This is our artist lecture series, which is part of our annual celebration of contemporary Native American art. Today, Preston Singletary is here to present for us. He has a beautiful visual presentation that he has prepared for all of you. Preston has been a part of Blue Rain Gallery's artist stable for about 24 years now. Preston is the very first glass artist that we began working with. Preston has really paved the way for Blue Rain Gallery to expand its scope in glass, and we're very grateful to Preston for helping us with that. Preston has been a huge inspiration to a lot of other artists that we work with, and has been instrumental in helping to execute collaborations throughout the years. Preston Singletary has himself now been working in glass for about 38 years. He has seen a lot, done a lot. His artwork is just stunning, and truly he needs no further introduction from me. So I will now turn over the microphone to Preston.
Thank you all for being here under these unusual circumstances. Walking around Santa Fe, and it feels like a Western ghost town all of a sudden. But I mean, I'm happy to be here and present to you the new work. I did make a pretty new presentation. I asked Denise what would be a good topic to focus on, and she mentioned it was the symbolism that is referenced in the work that I do. So I didn't know how many of you actually knew about my background. So I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction. You know, I grew up in Seattle. I am Tlingit native from the southeast of Alaska. My great-grandmother here is pictured in the center. She grew up in Sitka, and she moved down from Sitka in 1923 with this man. She was widowed, so it was the first traditional marriage that she was married to James Bartlett, and then she was widowed with a few children, and then she remarried this man named Dionisio Gubatayo, who was a Filipino man. So she remarried a Filipino man. She moved to Seattle. And that's how we ended up in Seattle. In our clan system, we have different house groups. My particular house group is the Kagwantan, which I found on, I guess we own this particular street up in Sitka somewhere. I took a picture of it to remind me that that's the case. And so this is a photo of some of my in some of my regalia, which is the clothing that we wear for ceremony, and represents where we come from within the context of the tribe. As my son is from many years ago, actually, because he's 20 years old now, but I love that photo. This is some of the more extended families, great uncles and aunts who were from the Filipino, the half Tlingit, half Filipino side. And so my grandmother was from the first batch of children who, was widowed, or my great-grandmother was widowed. And so she married a Filipino man as well. My grandmother was full-blooded Tlingit. So technically, I'm a Tlinkapino. So this is some of my other Tlinkapino relatives here. My father was a great outdoorsman and very creative in many different ways. He was always dabbling in lots of creative pursuits and just, painting and poetry writing, and he was a very well-read individual. He had a great knowledge of a broad number of subjects, and between him and my mother also did a lot of handicrafts. We were when I was young, we and also played music. They played Delta blues and sang together and played folk music and stuff. And so that was part of my upbringing, is that this sort of creative sphere around me. And this is my wife, Åsa Sandlund. She is from Sweden. We had 2 kids. And so, growing up in, as I got started in glass blowing in about 1982, my only aspiration up to that point was to be a musician. And so that's a constant theme that runs through my life, and it's part of my artistic process, I like to say, because I still, work with music today. This was a band that I had about 12 or more years ago, Little Big Band. This was a group that was sort of soul, jazz, and pop, rock music. So this was something that I dabbled in for many years, and then, but I also have, played with Native American musicians. So we took Native themes and Native performance and did, these shows. And James Luna was a participant in the first band that we had. And so, again, I can't overstate that this is a major, kind of artistic process for me, because I'm working with this group now called Kuik, which means potlatch in the Tlingit language. And so this fellow here is Bernie Worrell, who was a very famous musician that I met on my 50th birthday. And we produced some music. This is our first album. We've actually produced 3 albums so far of music that is based on spoken word and traditional singing, traditional language, the Tlingit Haida, and most recently the Yupik language. And so we take music and kind of reinterpret it in new ways. We're about ready to create a fundraiser for our 4th album with Bernie. Bernie passed away in 2016. And so we were left with this legacy of music that he helped us produce. So anyway, so launching into the art, the visual art side of what I do, I always think of this as the Tlingit way. I was always searching for the Tlingit way, and here it is. Something that sort of reconnected me with my roots. And so some of the things, this has been a very unusual time in everyone's life in the world. And so some of these things that are kind of like a foundation of my own, I don't know if you want to call it, maybe they're kind of like a mantra of some sort. The Carlos Castaneda was everybody was reading that in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and I read it, his books, and found a lot of kind of inspiration from that sort of pointed to a spiritual sort of connection. And so I know that his work has basically been debunked over the years because he was fabricating a lot of this stuff. But there's a lot of truth within that. Those teachings that I think are very interesting and inspirational. For instance, the idea of dream, traveling within your dream time, which led me to kind of be more curious about it. So I started to read Jung's psychology books, and this was because he was one of the pioneers of dream analysis. So this was something that I took a big interest in. It's something that kind of informs my idea of spirituality, because I was not raised with any religious instructions. So this was something that I was left to kind of find on my own. Aikido was a process. It was a martial art that I studied for several years, and which was really interesting because it's tethered together with a lot of Zen Buddhism philosophy. And so that was also something that is part of the confluence of the way that I think about things. And of course, there's Joseph Campbell, who was also a big inspiration in terms of mythology and talking about the symbolism behind the mythology. And so all of these things I've sort of dabbled in and studied on some, small level, some, bigger than small levels. But anyway, it's part of how I think about things. So in the summer of 2000, I met this fellow named Joe David, who is a very respected artist on the Northwest Coast. He's actually from the Nuu-chah-nulth tribe, which is the west coast of Vancouver Island. And we made a friendship and connection in the summer of 2000. And he sort of became my mentor. So I made this piece that basically honors that sort of connection, the teacher and the apprentice. And at that time when we were, so basically we were up at the Pilchuck Glass School, which is a international glass school that is located north of Seattle. And basically he kind of introduced me to the whole sweat lodge ceremony. So he was a sun dancer. He, he kind of initiated me, so to speak. I was, I had never done the sweat lodge. I didn't really understand anything about it. And he's, so we were up at the campus at the Pilchuck Glass School just getting to know each other. And he said he wanted to run these sweat lodges up on the hillside. And Pilchuck is located way out in the wilderness, on this tree farm. It's a very beautiful area. But I wasn't sure if they were going to allow us to do a sweat lodge up there, but we got permission to do it. We were talking to the students about, those who were interested, come talk to Joe, and after a few minutes of looking into their eyes and telling them what they need to know, then he would, let them participate in the sweat lodge or maybe not. And so I was pretty nervous about the whole thing, and I was like, Joe, the day was getting closer, we were going to set up, build this sweat lodge. And I said, look into my eyes, tell me, am I ready to do this? And he said, well, let me put it this way. He says, you better be. And so I basically acquiesced and said, okay. So in 11 days' time, we did 4 ceremonies with some of the students on the campus. And at the end of that ceremony, that we did a morning ceremony where we went in late at night and we come out of the lodge at daybreak. And that evening, he actually adopted me and shared his name with me. So that's one thing that is, an old tradition on the Northwest Coast, that you would receive names throughout your lifetime, maybe denoting, a different stage in your life. So he shared his name with me. It was Kuwan Chief, means transforming killer whale. And there was an artist name that was given to him. And so here's Joe. Here's some of the work that we've done collaboratively over the past, few years. The wolf skull, and then there's sort of a wood and glass combination here. Always, inspired, well, in some cases by, traditional objects. So this is kind of a dance headdress that would be worn, is inspired by one of those kinds of headdresses. But then, a few years prior to that, in about 1988, I met this guy, David Svensson, who became also a mentor and a good friend to me. And he was a carver, or he is a carver, lives in California now, but he's non-native, but he lived in Alaska and learned the tradition of carving. And so I asked him to make this sculpture for me. I've done this in bronze, so here's, in a beautiful setting up in Seattle. And I've also made it in glass. So this is, 7.5 foot glass casting. It weighs about 2,000 pounds. And this is a story of my great-grandmother, how she had a pet grizzly bear as a child in Sitka. And so anyways, that story kind of goes that she was living in Sitka at the turn of the century, and some family was out hunting, and they shot a bear, and they saw these little cubs that were sort of rooting around, and so they picked them up and brought them back to Sitka, to the village where my great-grandmother lived, and so she raised it as a pet. And so she had it tied up behind, the back of the house, and she took care of it and played with it all the time. And this bear had developed this little cub had developed a taste for saltwater taffy. So at the time, there was a lot of Russians that were in Sitka at the time, and there was a woman that made saltwater taffy. And so, so my great-grandmother would go out to the fields and pick berries when they were in season, and she'd bring them back and sell the berries so she could get Russian money so she could buy taffy for her little pet. And so eventually, it got to be too big to keep around the house, and so there was a man that came by and decided that he's going to take it off her hands and put it into a zoo. So that's what happened to the little cub. And so this is another second large-scale casting that I'm working on. The bronze version already exists, but this is a killer whale totem theme, which is my main crest symbol in my culture. And so this is a little process shot here. So this involves creating, a rubber mold around this form. And then you can take different, these sections and make waxes. So it's basically a lost wax process. So here are some of the waxes that are made, and then plaster is cast around the wax, and then it's melted out, and then you load it in with glass, and then you melt it into that form. And it seems like a very simple process, straightforward, but it's very technical. So it's the point at which it no longer becomes art; it becomes science. So I ended up having to go to the Czech Republic to have these pieces made. So they're produced in the Czech Republic, and then I have them shipped back to the States. So here is the most recent large-scale totem. This one's actually 8 feet tall, and it's 2,800 pounds. So this piece is currently looking for a home. And then some of the other large-scale pieces that I've done, commissions. This is a wall panel, a wall screen for the Seattle Art Museum. It's about 7 feet wide by 5 feet tall. And some public art pieces that I've been working on. This is a piece that's actually in Portland. So this is a new direction. This is something that I've been working with for the past few years. This is a steel and glass combination. This is a public art piece that I did for the Boney Courthouse in Anchorage, Alaska. And this is a mural that is inside the interior of the atrium, or the foyer of the courthouse. So the overall composition is, this is from a little mezzanine area, looking from this little balcony over to the opposite side, and it's supposed to represent the sunrise and the northern lights in the background there. This is a piece that's going to be installed in the city of Seattle. This is going to be a canoe paddle, and this is another story of petrol and Raven. And Raven steals the water. I'll tell you a little bit of the story of that one a little later. And then this is a piece that actually went into a cultural arts center in Juneau, Alaska, which is from, this is the central region where the Tlingit community resides. They spread, it spans south and also north of Juneau, up into Yakutat. And so this was a real honor for me to get this piece into back into my home community. This was very special for me. And this is a more recent piece that was installed in the fall, last fall. This is a collaboration with some Jamestown Sklallam carvers. This is which is actually the local Seattle area tribe. So we did this Weaver's Welcome, we called it, and this was inspired by objects out of the Burke Museum, which is the University Museum in Seattle, and they also have quite a collection of Northwest Coast Native art. And this one is actually, has yet to be produced. This is a little maquette, but this is an interesting one too, because this is an octopus or kraken. A kraken has been, it's been just announced that that Seattle is going to receive a hockey team. And so the kraken is actually going to be their mascot. So it just so happens that this piece is going to reside outside of the sports arena where they're going to be playing hockey. So really excited about that piece coming together, and hopefully we'll get some opportunity to license our design to the team. It's my hope, anyway. Oh, I thought I took these ones out. Anyway, I'm going to be, accused of oversharing because there's so many images here. So I'm going to try to go quickly. This was the Pilchuck Founders Totem Pole. This was in a thing that we did in 2001, to honor the founders of the Pilchuck Glass School. So me and David Svensson, it was actually David Svensson's idea to do this totem pole to honor the founders of the school. We got, the go-ahead by the school, and we started to carve this totem pole up in Haines, Alaska, where David had worked, quite a while over the summers. And so we worked with some of the local Tlingit carvers up in Haines, and then we sent the totem down to the Pilchuck, campus. And then, so basically this is my contribution, my one contribution to this particular piece. A lot of people misunderstand I did not carve the totem pole. There was other carvers. So it was a big collaborative effort. So this, as it turns out, is the face of Dale Chihuly. This is representing Dale Chihuly, who was one of the founders of the Pilchuck School. And so you could see that we created these glass elements that were inlaid into the pole. John Hauberg was one of the major patrons in the Seattle area, also the heir to Weyerhaeuser, donated a significant Northwest Coast Native art collection to the Seattle Art Museum. And so in one of those objects, they couldn't determine the provenance of it, so they decided to return this double-headed killer whale dagger here that was repatriated to the family up in Angoon, Alaska. And so as a result, John Hauberg was adopted in his name. They gave him a Tlingit name. And so we asked for permission from that family to carve a version of that dagger. So we cast it in glass, and we brought this, we as a school, everybody kind of helped participate with this, the process of finishing the totem pole there on the campus for the 3-week session that we were there. And so as a school, we came together and we brought this totem pole to its final installation spot. There's David and I climbing up on a ladder to put the glass hat on the top of the totem. And so this is the piece that's finished. And since David Svensson's actually a neon guy, so we created these multicolored neon tubes that illuminate the castings behind certain sections in the totem pole. And so, talking a little bit about mythology and symbolism, I made the acquaintance of Walter Porter, who was a Tlingit mythologist from Yakutat, Alaska, and so he met me. We met each other in 2004, and we started to correspond, and we kept in touch. And he participated with the first museum show that I had. He made a really beautiful essay, and at that time we started to work together, and we created a series of presentations that we called Spokesman for Culture. And so he taught me, or he shared with me a lot of his teachings, or a lot of his insights about the Tlingit mythologies. And so I called him the Tlingit Joseph Campbell. So the first thing you have to know about our tribe is that it's split into two different sides. You've got the eagle and you have the raven. And so under each eagle or raven moiety, you've got these different clan symbols that are represented under each of the moieties. So, so here's some of the ways that I've done showing eagle and raven. There's always a balance and a sort of a support and reverence of the opposite moiety. You know, for instance, if I'm the eagle moiety, I would be working with the raven material. So the raven clan would approach, you know, artists from the eagle moiety to make their objects, and by, you know, and then the reciprocal thing would be that the raven would make the eagle moiety objects. You know, totem poles, the regalia, the clothing, everything that, you know, basically represents the clans. And so these are different ways that I've shown, you know, these eagle and raven pieces. Like on the left side there's the you know, the eagle, and then the right side there's the raven. And interestingly enough, though, it's been very in the old days you would never see the eagle or the raven depicted together, but it's like this sort of modern day PC kind of trying to tread between those two things, that they're showing these birds together, and they're often referred to as lovebirds. So, you know, sort of like, you know, so the protocols that one of the or the other moiety wouldn't ever be offended because their moiety wasn't represented. So, you know, early on I basically used to make objects that were, you know, recognizable as traditional objects. So basically here's a ladle. This is like a grease dish or a food dish. These hat forms that I tend to revisit, you know, time and time again, because they become like a kind of a blank canvas that I can create infinite varieties of designs on those particular hats. And this was the first, you know, form that I developed as a glass blower, because I think most glass blowers have tried to make this shape before, like a bowl form that, or a lampshade or whatever you want to, you know, however you want to look at it. But, you know, so upside down it's a bowl, but the hat form would be traditionally made out of basketry. You know, the masks would basically be used for stagecraft and storytelling. And so this is a killer whale mask. This is my crest symbol. This is a raven rattle, which has more commonly become known as a chief's rattle. So it's basically such a fanciful, you know, it's typically carved out of wood, but such a fanciful piece and so complex that I think a chief, you know, I think they originated as a shaman rattle, and then more commonly they became a chief's rattle over time, because it was kind of, you know, such a special object that the chief wanted to be seen, you know, used, you know, holding this, and, you know, he would sort of lead in the ceremonies, or like a potlatch, which is one of our traditional ceremonies. So different ways of trying to iterate, you know, traditional objects. This is a comb, so it's a steel and glass combination, sculpted glass, and then the tines are steel. A canoe paddle. So this is a full-scale canoe paddle. It was cast in glass. So just playing with different techniques of glass forming to create these objects. This is referred to as a tana. I titled it Symbolic Wealth because that's what it is to the culture. This is something that was an object that was so prestigious that if a chief owned one of these tanas, it was considered a money piece. It could be, you know, it could be redeemed as a high value object between another clan or another neighboring tribe. So you found these types of tinahs, you found them all the way, down into British Columbia, down into the Vancouver area, from the Kwakwaka'wakw to the Tsimshian to the Haida, and the Tlingit people are the most northern people to have these kinds of objects. Of course, rattles were used in healing ceremonies. This is basically just a portrait mask that I created, kind of working my chops out on sculpting these glass. So this is sculpted out of, by hand. This is not blown into a mold per se, like some of the other pieces that I've made. And this is an oyster catcher rattle. This is a form that is, you can see those horns. It's like a mountain goat on the forefront of that rattle form. So these were also shamans' rattles, and so the mountain goat basically symbolizes this animal that was revered because it could navigate this impossible terrain, and it was up in the mountains closer to the heavens. So that's why it was utilized in this particular imagery. So you have like a reclining sort of shaman figure holding on to these horns, and then the oyster catcher was sort of the long neck there with the beak. The oyster catcher was also thought of as a master of two realms. He could fly and also dive into the water and catch fish, and so that change of worlds was thought of as having a special power. And then in the front you can't actually see it, but it's got a hawk, and a hawk is basically, so you can see the beak, sort of a recurved beak there, just kind of sticking out, and that's considered like a power symbol in the culture. This is a dagger, so mostly a steel, and then a small glass eagle on the top. The killer whale. So I've used killer whales a lot in my artwork because it is my crest symbol, and so I like to play with those images, in different ways. And so I'm showing you different examples of how I've used the killer whale. And this interesting, this sort of vapor that's kind of blowing out of the killer whale's blowhole. So you often see this when a killer whale comes up, and you see this sort of like vapor mist that kind of comes out of the blowhole, and it's often thought of as kind of a spirit that's kind of dancing on the water. So that's why I put that little shaman figure inside that little bubbly thing, sort of coming out of the killer whale. And this is a few years ago I saw a picture of an albino killer whale, and so this is how I kind of honored that sighting of the albino killer whale. Because anytime in most native cultures, if there's an albino animal, it's thought of as a supernatural, animal, a supernatural being, and so to our culture, it was thought of as this very special, killer whale. And so this was a story about the origin of mosquitoes. So this was about this cannibal giant that lived up in Alaska, and in this mythology up in Alaska. There was this cannibal giant that was taking children, and so maybe it was a Sasquatch, or maybe it was this we call it the cannibal giant. So I'm imagining that when in the old days they would tell stories to the little kids, like the boogeyman in the woods or whatever. But so there was this cannibal giant in the old days, and there was the community was pretty concerned about this. So this one man decided that he was going to stalk this animal, and he was going to do something about it. So this is him, looking for this animal, this beast, and so finally he finds it, and he's been tracking it, and so he decides to ambush it. So he takes out this beast, knocks it unconscious, and then he decides he's really going to do away with it. So what he did is he built this fire, so you can see this little fire down in the right hand. And so what happens is that he burns the body of this cannibal giant, and then the embers from the cannibal giant, they take off into the air, and then they transform into mosquitoes. So they're still trying to eat people even today. So this is another sort of iteration of a mosquito that I've done in the past. This one is a fog woman story. This was about Raven, who fell in love with this woman who was from the sky world. So he goes up to the sky world and talks to her father, and he says, I want to marry your daughter. The man gives Raven permission to marry her, and he says, but always be respectful of my daughter. Take care of her, and don't ever disrespect her. And so over time, they've been married for a while, and he kind of forgets his promise, and he's like kind of belittling her, and then a time of famine comes, and so this is the daughter here. So there's a time of famine, and everybody's really going through this starvation, and she starts to take this cedar bark and she starts to kind of twine it together, and he belittles her even more and says, why are you wasting your time with this activity? It seems we got to find some food. And she says, just be patient. And so she finishes her project, and she goes down to the river. She dips the basket into the water, and then these salmon emerge out of the basket. So you can kind of see the salmon below her face coming out of the basket. Oh, here's a better shot. So she is holding the basket with salmon emerging. And then this is Loon. This is another story of an old man who's blind, and he's a shaman. So this is how I've sort of created this shaman figure, this blind man. And his wife has finally gotten tired of him after all these years, and he's like always giving his services away for free, and they're having a hard time making ends meet. And so she decides to lead him out into the forest, and she abandons him there. And so he's not being able to see, he doesn't know where he is. He's calling out to whoever, trying to find, get attention. And so he basically, so this loon speaks to him and says, come to me and sit on my back, and I'll help you. And so he submerges him on the back of this loon, and submerges into the water and emerges and submerges and emerges. And each time the man starts to regain his sight. And so here, this is kind of a picture. You can't see it very well there, but it's this human figure sitting on the back of the loon. And so finally he regains his sight. And so he has nothing to offer the loon. So he says, here, take my necklace, and he throws it onto the loon. And then that's how the loon gets these sort of spotted speckles around his neck. Another story here about Raven and Petrol. And Petrol is this bird who lives by this natural spring, and he is so he gets visited by Raven one day. The Raven comes to him and says, but Petrol's very distrustful of why he's there, and so he's talking to Petrol and just kind of talking, sort of whiling away the hours. And Raven doesn't trust him, so he doesn't want to leave this natural spring because it's such a a special place. And so Raven says, "Hey brother, I'm just going to sleep here for overnight, but I'll make my way on in the morning." And so in the middle of the night, Raven takes dog feces and he rubs it on the butt of Petrol. And so when daybreak hits and Raven says, "Hey brother, you wake up, you've defecated on yourself in the middle of the night." And so Petrol is really embarrassed and he flies off to go clean himself. And so while Petrol flies away, Raven swallows up that entire natural spring. So he swallows all this water, and then, so this is an image of Raven swollen with all this water. He flies off, but he's so weighted down by the water that water starts to dribble out of his mouth, and it creates the rivers and the streams in the world. So you can see the blue streaks of water coming down. And I feel like I got a lot of images here. Hence the oversharing. But this is Raven in the Box of Daylight. This was an exhibition that I've put together for the Museum of Glass, and it's currently traveling. It's in Wichita Art Museum now, and it's going to head to the Smithsonian eventually. Everything's been sort of postponed. But this is a story of Raven in the beginning of time. And Raven is a white bird. And so Raven, he's traveling around and he encounters the fisherman of the night. And the fisherman, he asks the fisherman of the night, where's the daylight? Where's the daylight? And the fishermen explain that the daylight is being kept by this old man at the head of the Nass River, and he has the daylight in his clan house. So he goes to the old man and asks if he can enter the clan house because he'd like to see the daylight. And the old man will not allow him into the clan house. But the Raven is also told about that the old man has this beautiful daughter who goes out to drink water in the mornings every morning. So Raven devises this plan, and he transforms himself into a speck of dirt, and he floats down this river where she's going to gather water. And so she scoops up the water, and because she's of a noble class, she has attendants with her. And so these people that are helping her, they take a feather and they draw it through the water to test the purity of it. And they see that the water has this little speck of dirt in it. So they toss out the water and they toss out Raven. So Raven has to reformulate his plans, and so he transforms himself this time into a hemlock needle, and so created this mobile form that, Raven kind of deconstructing himself, and he's got wings and head and all there. And so this time she scoops up some water, and he's a hemlock needle, and she swallows it, and she instantly knows that she swallowed something. But she swallows Raven, who transforms inside her body and becomes a human. So this is kind of the transformation here, with the female figure and Raven there in the belly. It's kind of a humanoid hybrid there. And so when it came time to give birth, she's having a really hard time giving birth. And so typically what they would do is carve a little sort of a hole in the back, and they'd line this little hole with fine furs where the child would be born. And she's having a hard time giving birth, and so a medicine woman comes by and says, "Oh, take the fine furs out and put some goat's beard moss," because So once they do that and they swap out the furs for the moss, then the child comes easily. And so he's transforming into a human in this form here, and this I've got video kind of iterating this kind of feeling of transformation and motion in the exhibition. And so that's how the raven gets into the clan house. So now he's inside the clan house, and he's, and the old man, is excited to have a grandchild, even though his daughter had no wife. They didn't really seem to question that. But so he's enjoying this time with his grandchild, who is a very precocious young child, and he's really mischievous. So he's always, rooting around in the house, and he's looking for something. And he's actually looking for the boxes. He finds this box. The first one, he's playing with this box. And when no one's looking, he opens it up. It's the stars. So he takes the stars and he tosses them through the smoke hole in the clan house. And that's how the stars got into the sky. A few days later, he's still poking around, and he finds his second box, which he's starting to play with. And he opens up that box, and it's the moon. So he takes the moon and he places it in the sky. And each time the old man is getting, kind of disappointed with him. And he's being, the child's being scolded and he's being punished, but then they forget about it. And so when it comes to the third and final box, he finds this box and wants to play with it, and the old man says, no, not this time. So the raven child starts to fuss and cry and carry on and drive everybody crazy. And it turns out that he stops eating, and he kind of becomes sickly, and he's just like laying in bed. And the daughter goes to the old man, her father, and says, is there anything more important than your grandchild? And so the old man says, yeah, you're right. So he takes the box down and puts the box in front of him and says, don't open the box. And so, so he bides his time, and finally this child is becoming tired of being in human form, so he decides to transform back into a raven, and he opens up this box and he takes the sun. Often he'll take the sun in his beak, so that's why you see this ball inside the raven's beak often. And so the raven's still white at this time, but the old man realizes that he's been fooled. So he grabs onto the tail of the raven, and he's pulling it. The raven's trying to get away, and he holds it over the fire, and then the soot from the fire turns Raven black. Eventually, Raven, he manages to get away, and he flies through the smoke hole, and he breaks daylight on the whole world. And at that time, the world was still in darkness, but the flashing of the light caused the people, some of them, ran off into the forest, and they became the forest animals. Some of them jumped into the sky, and they became the birds. Some of them jumped into the water, and they became the sea life. So that's, and over time, these different animal symbols were adopted to represent the clans. So in this final room, you can see, well, you can't see very well here, but there's a video that's kind of animates this idea of the world getting lighter. So it goes kind of from dark to light. So it's kind of an experiential exhibit. And I'm just going to flash through these last ones kind of quickly, because I'm taking up a lot of time here, but these are some ways that I've taken beyond the traditional form and beyond the sort of the storytelling. A lot of these pieces are fairly abstract, so this is kind of my reflection on modernism, primitivism, and taking these kind of spare and simple forms and creating, ornamenting them with Northwest Coast style art. So these are basically, another direction that I sometimes go when I'm, just trying to make sort of a lyrical flow of this design style. So these are, kind of an homage back to my glass blowing days and making these vessel forms, and then ornamenting them with Northwest Coast designs. And these pieces are, as you can see, the piece here in person. This is Raven in the North Winds. This is a simple story of Raven who was trying to catch salmon at one point, and it was so hot that he decided to call in the north winds to blow cool air, and so basically that's what created the ice, the ice peaks, and so that's story behind that. This is a brand new piece that is bronze, so I like playing with other materials. This bronze piece, this is called Meditations with Fire, and this is my kind of a self-portrait of mine. As if you see the piece close, I'm holding a glass blowing pipe. This octopus form is kind of like the idea of the fluid nature of molten glass, and then you've got the eagle on the top, and then the sun disc is glass casting that's up on top. This is a soul catcher. This is a shaman's amulet. This is used oftentimes like a straw to extract, the sickness out of an individual, and you could sort of blow it in a different direction. Again, another iteration of a killer whale. Brand new piece from the spring. And then this one is called Raven Was a Man, because I was recently on a trip up in Alaska, and I was talking with an elder. A lot of my elders have been passing away, so I talked to a guy who was from the Kagwantan clan, and I asked him if I could, talk to him on occasion, if we could correspond, and just looking for more people to kind of interact with up in Alaska. And he told me at one point, he said, and I don't know if you really knew this, but, Raven was a man. He wasn't a bird. We talk about Raven in our stories, but Raven was actually a human. Maybe his name was Raven. It just kind of blew my mind because, the idea of these mythologies that we use and we, for, our artwork and what have you. So you can't see it very clearly on there, but I put Raven as a man in the belly of this Raven sculpture. And then these are, this one's called Upside Down World. This is kind of how I think of, where we are in the world today. And this one's called Surrounded by Ancestors, and we've got the eagle and the raven surrounding this human form who's kind of singing, that sort of round lips or like a singing figure. And then this is a killer whale. These are all pieces that are in the gallery currently. Again, a killer whale crest hat. And then this is a shark. And then my final piece, final image I'm showing you here is the brand new bronze piece, which I made to kind of illustrate my family. So my wife is from Sweden, and so I put Odin here in the center, and he's kind of got the longboat there. You've got sort of the slats for the longboat, and Raven is often shown with two ravens. Odin is shown with two ravens, and so Raven's like the common tie there, and then the top figure is my wife, and then Odin, and then I've got our two children, and then the bottom figure is the wolf, which is our little puppy dog that we shown in there. So there you can see another angle, but the pieces in the gallery just arrived today. And this is another piece that's going to arrive on Friday, I guess. A little late, but this is a canoe form. This is about 8 feet long, and it's going to mount on the wall somewhere. And that's it.